The silence in the Columbia University auditorium was so thick it seemed to suck the air from people's lungs. Marcus Thompson, 52, his blue janitor's uniform still damp with sweat, held the $3 million Stradivarius violin as if it were made of liquid crystal. Director Helen Pritchard, seated in the front row in her Chanel suit and pearls that cost more than Marcus's home, had a cruel smile stretched across her face. She had just made the stupidest bet of her life. In 90 seconds, that smile would vanish. But to understand how a 52-year-old black janitor ended up holding one of the world's most expensive violins before an elite audience expecting his humiliation, we need to go back 6 days. 6 days that would change not just one life, but expose a 34-year-old secret hidden in the university's core.
Monday, 4:47 in the morning. Marcus pushed his cleaning cart down the fourth-floor corridor of the arts building. His right knee clicked with every step, a reminder of an accident no one at that university knew about. He never told. He never told anything. He stopped at room 407, the advanced music practice room. The door was ajar, and an orange light leaked from the gap. Strange. No one should be there at that hour. Marcus peered in. Professor Vladimir Kozlov, with disheveled white hair, was sleeping upright, leaning against the piano, a nearly empty vodka bottle beside scattered sheet music. The old master was visibly drunk, something Marcus had seen 3 other times in the past 2 months. Something was wrong with Kozlov, but it wasn't his problem. Janitors don't ask questions. Janitors clean up and disappear. But then Marcus saw it. There, abandoned on the floor like a forgotten toy, was the 1721 Stradivarius. The violin the music department had bought at auction for an obscene fortune. The instrument with its own insurance, individual alarm, and kept locked in a motion sensor display case. And it was on the floor. On the damn floor near the stumbling leg of a drunk professor. Marcus looked around. The corridor was empty. He entered the room, picked up the violin with trembling hands and carefully placed it on the piano. That's when he felt it. The weight, the balance, the aged wood beneath his calloused fingers, and something inside him, something that had been buried for 34 years, stirred. It churned. It woke with a ravenous hunger. Before he could process the thought, Marcus looked at Kozlov, still snoring, and positioned the violin under his chin. His fingers found the strings as if they had never stopped, as if 34 years hadn't passed. He closed his eyes and played 4 bars of Vivaldi. Only 4. And in those 12 seconds, Marcus Thompson was no longer the invisible janitor. He was once again the 17-year-old boy who had been accepted into Juilliard, the boy who had a future, the boy who existed before everything fell apart. What do you think you're doing? The voice cut the air like shattering glass. Marcus opened his eyes and almost let the violin slip. Standing in the doorway was Director Helen Pritchard, eyes wide with shock and fury. She never arrived before 8 a.m. Never. But there she was, witnessing a black janitor playing the university's most valuable instrument. I was just... Marcus began, but she was already crossing the room, snatching the violin from his hands as if he were a thief. Do you know how much this is worth? Do you have any idea what could have happened if you dropped it? Her voice rose in volume. You touched this, with your dirty hands, your cleaning hands. Marcus felt his blood run cold, not from her anger, but from the way she said it. Your cleaning hands, as if they were inherently dirty, as if decades of honest work had tainted something essential in him. Professor Kozlov was drunk, Marcus said quietly, pointing at the man who was now waking up confused. The violin was on the floor. I was just putting it somewhere safe. Helen turned to Kozlov, who was stumbling, trying to focus his vision. Vladimir, is this true? The Russian professor rubbed his eyes, looked at the bottle, at the violin in Helen's hands, and something in his face changed. He tried to steal it. Kozlov mumbled, and Marcus felt the world tilt. I woke up and he had the Stradivarius, trying to leave the room. The lie was so blatant Marcus couldn't breathe. But of course it would be like this. A drunk white professor versus a black janitor. There was no contest. Helen was already picking up her phone. Security, 4th floor. We have a situation. Marcus knew what would come next. He would be fired, maybe arrested. His record, clean for 52 years, stained. And the worst part, his son David, who was in his 2nd year at Columbia on a partial scholarship that Marcus supplemented with 2 jobs, would find out his father had been expelled for theft. The shame would be unbearable. I didn't try to steal anything, Marcus said, and for the first time in 34 years he let a little of his old confidence leak into his voice. I played the violin because I know how to play, because I'm a musician. Helen let out a laugh. A short, sharp laugh full of disdain. You? A musician? She looked at Kozlov, who was also laughing now, more comfortable with the lie. You're a janitor, Mr. Thompson. You clean restrooms and empty trash cans. Don't come at me with fantasies. It was at that moment that something broke in Marcus. Not anger. Something deeper. The floodgate he had built 34 years ago, when he put his violin away for the last time and swore never to play again. Then test me, Marcus heard his own voice say, and he barely believed the words had left his mouth. Test me. Here. Now. If I can play, if I prove I'm a musician, you drop this and I keep my job. Helen's smile grew bigger, more cruel, like a predator who had just seen its prey offer itself up. Oh, this is going to be fun. Very well, Mr. Thompson. You want your chance? You'll have your chance. This Friday, at the mid-semester recital, before the entire arts faculty, the donors, the press. She moved closer to him, so close Marcus could smell her expensive perfume. You will play the opening solo, 3 minutes. And when you fail, when you prove you're just a janitor with delusions of grandeur, I will personally ensure you never work in any educational institution in this country again. Understood? Marcus should have backed down. He should have apologized, begged for his job. But that something inside him, that thing that had awakened upon touching the Stradivarius, was roaring now. Understood, he said. But when I play, when I prove I have the talent, you will give me a position in the music department, as an assistant professor. Helen almost choked on her laugh. A professor? You're insane. She looked at Kozlov, who was shaking his head in disbelief. You know what? I accept. Because this will never happen. Vladimir, you are my witness. If by some divine miracle this man can play acceptably, I will hire him. But when he fails, she pointed a finger at Marcus's chest. You lose everything. Job, reputation. And I will personally ensure your son David's scholarship is revoked for association with a liar. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. She knew about David. Of course she knew. She had just put the one thing that mattered more than anything on the table. And now, Marcus understood. He hadn't just bet his job. He had bet his son's future. He had bet everything. And he hadn't even touched a real violin in 34 years. Then it's a deal, Helen said, extending her hand for a sarcastic shake. Friday, 7 p.m., main auditorium. Formal attire, naturally. Oh, and Mr. Thompson? She smiled that shark's smile. I'm already preparing your termination notice. It will save time after your performance. When Marcus left that room, his hands were trembling so badly he had to lean against the wall. What had he done? Why had he let pride get the better of him? 34 years. It had been 34 years since he had really played, since the accident, since everything collapsed. And now in 5 days he would have to stand before New York's musical elite and prove something he himself no longer knew was true. That he still had it. That the talent hadn't died along with his dreams. But there was something Helen didn't know. Something even his son David didn't know. A secret so deep Marcus had buried it along with the younger version of himself. And if he was going to expose everything now, if he was going to risk everything, then he would at least make it count. But first he needed help. He needed someone who knew his true story, and there was only one person alive who knew. Professor Elijah Morrison. If he was still alive, if he still remembered. Before I tell you what Marcus did next, and more importantly, before I reveal the 34-year-old secret he was keeping, a secret that would change everything, If you are as invested in this story as I am telling it, subscribe to the channel now. Hit the notification bell because what's coming will shock you. Marcus is about to make a call that will open doors that should have remained closed. And when you discover the real reason he stopped playing, you'll understand why this isn't just a story about music. It's a story about 34 years of delayed justice. Marcus didn't sleep that night. At 2:33 a.m., sitting in the tiny kitchen of the Queen's apartment he shared with David, he finally dialed the number he had kept in a worn-out address book for decades. The phone rang 5 times. 7, 9. Just as Marcus was about to hang up, a hoarse, sleepy voice answered. "Hello? Professor Morrison, it's Marcus Thompson." Silence on the other end. A silence so long Marcus thought the call had dropped. Then, "My God, Marcus." The voice changed completely, becoming alert, almost startled. "Marcus Thompson? From the 1990 summer program?" "Yes, sir. We all thought you were..." Elijah Morrison didn't finish the sentence, but Marcus knew what he was going to say. "Dead, gone, ruined." "I need your help, Professor. I've done something really stupid." 40 minutes later, Marcus was standing in front of a brownstone in Brooklyn. The door opened before he could ring the bell. Elijah Morrison was 78 now, his hair completely white, but he had the same penetrating eyes Marcus remembered. Eyes that had seen something in Marcus 3 decades ago. Something special. Something rare. "Come in," Elijah said, and Marcus realized the old professor was trembling. Not from cold, from emotion. When Marcus told him everything, the violin on the floor, the theft accusation, the insane bet, the 5-day deadline, Elijah was silent for a long time. Finally, he stood up and went to a cabinet in the corner of the room. When he returned, he carried a yellowed folder. "I kept everything," Elijah said, opening the folder. Inside were 1990 newspaper clippings. 17-year-old prodigy accepted into Juilliard. Young violinist from Harlem impresses judges, and then the other articles, the ones from 3 months later. Student injured in attack. Musical promise has hands crushed in mugging. Juilliard mourns loss of future student. Marcus closed his eyes. He didn't need to read. He remembered every word, every headline. That October night when he was walking back late from rehearsal, the dead-end alley, the 3 men, the iron bar that came down on his hands 1, 2, 5 times as he screamed. He remembered waking up in the hospital, seeing his hands bandaged, fingers broken in 11 places. He remembered the surgeon saying he would play again, but not like before. Never like before. And he remembered putting the violin away, locking the music room in his mind and swearing that chapter was over. "Can you still play?" Elijah asked softly. Marcus slowly opened and closed his hands. "I can, but there's pain. Always pain. And there are limits. There are things these hands just don't do anymore. But you played on Monday with the Stradivarius. 4 bars, until the pain started. And in 5 days you need to play 3 minutes. Marcus nodded miserably. "I was an idiot. I let pride speak. And now I've risked my son's future because of it." Elijah was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Does David know? About Juilliard? About your talent?" "No. He thinks I've always been a janitor, that I've never been anything more than that." "Why?" "Because I didn't want him to feel sorry for me, or worse, that he had to achieve my lost dreams." Marcus rubbed his face with his hands. "I wanted him to be free to be who he is, not the shadow of what I could have been." Elijah stood up and went to another cabinet. When he returned, he carried a violin case. "This was mine, from when I still had fingers that obeyed." He opened the case, revealing an old, well-maintained violin. "You're going to practice here, with me, 5 days. I can't give you the hands you had at 17, but I can teach you to play with the hands you have at 52. Tuesday, 5:30 in the morning. Marcus arrived at the university with 3 hours of sleep and fingers throbbing with pain from the previous night's practice with Elijah. In the staff locker room, he changed quickly, trying not to think about the approaching recital. That's when Jerry, another janitor, came in. "Man, you're the talk of the town," Jerry said, eyes wide. "What?" "Director Pritchard. She's spreading the word to everyone that you're performing on Friday, that you claim to be a professional musician." Jerry lowered his voice. "She's making a joke out of it, Marcus, saying it's going to be the night's entertainment, that it'll be hilarious to watch you try." Marcus felt the humiliation burning in his stomach, but he didn't say anything. What could he say? Jerry hesitated, then put a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Look, I don't know what went down, but you're a good person, and whatever it is you're planning, good luck, man. You're gonna need it." Wednesday night. Marcus was in Elijah's room, fingers bleeding from so much practice. "Stop," Elijah ordered. "You're just hurting yourself more. I need to be able to make the transition in the second movement without—" "You won't be able to. Not with those hands." Elijah went to the piano. "Then we'll change the piece. We'll choose something that plays to your limitations, not against them." But the director chose the piece. Vivaldi, Concerto in a Minor. "And you think she chose that piece by chance?" Elijah looked at Marcus sadly. "She researched, Marcus. She found out about your accident. She knows." The world stopped. "How do you know this?" "Because I got a call today from a friend who works in the administrative department. Helen Pritchard requested your complete personnel file. She read everything. She knows about Juilliard, about the accident, about your hands, and she chose the most technically challenging piece specifically because of it. She's not hoping you'll fail, Marcus. She's ensuring you will fail." Marcus sat down heavily. Of course she had investigated. She wasn't an idiot. She was cruel, calculating and planning for maximum public humiliation. "So it's over," Marcus murmured. "I lost before I even started." "No," Elijah said firmly. "You changed the rules." "What rules?" "She chose the piece. She chose the composer, but Vivaldi composed 500 works, and there is one." Elijah went to the bookshelf searching. "There is one I heard you play once. 34 years ago, at your Juilliard audition. You played it as an improvisation when the judges asked for something from the heart. He found the sheet music. This one, the Sinfonia in B minor, RV 169. Do you remember it?" Marcus took the sheet music, and he remembered. God, how he remembered. That piece was written by Vivaldi after he lost his best student. It was about loss, about grief, about making music even when your heart is broken. "I haven't played this in 34 years, and it's time to play it again." Thursday morning. Marcus was cleaning the third-floor corridor when he saw David walking with a group of friends. His son was 19, studying engineering. Everything Marcus hadn't managed to be: stable, focused, with a guaranteed future. David saw him and waved. "Hey, Dad." Marcus waved back, but before he could say anything, one of David's friends commented loudly enough for Marcus to hear. "Is it true your father is playing at the recital tomorrow?" David laughed. "What? No. Where did you get that from?" "It's on the bulletin boards, David. Director Pritchard announced it. A special local talent will open the recital." She showed him her phone. David read it, and Marcus saw the color drain from his son's face. This can't be true. David looked at Marcus, who was frozen in the middle of the corridor. "Dad? What's going on?" Marcus led David to an empty room. And there, for the first time in 19 years, he told him. He told him about Juilliard, about the talent, about the accident, about the broken hands and the buried dreams, about being just a janitor because it was all that was left of a future that had been stolen from him. David was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was strange. "You lied to me. My whole life. I was protecting you." "Protecting me? From what? From knowing my dad was talented? From knowing he had dreams?" David stood up, hands shaking. "You let me think we were just ordinary, that we had nothing special. And all this time you had been... I chose this life, David. You didn't choose anything. They forced you. And instead of fighting, you gave up and pretended you were never anything more. The words cut Marcus deeper than anything Helen Pritchard had said, because they came from his son, and because they were true. Tomorrow, David said, his voice controlled now cold. Tomorrow you go out there and you play. Not for your pride, not for the stupid bet, but because I need to know. I need to know if my father's a coward who gave up or a fighter who just paused. He walked to the door, stopped. And if you fail tomorrow, at least you'll be failing trying, which is more than you've done in the last 34 years. The door slammed shut. Marcus was left alone in the empty room, and for the first time since the accident, Marcus Thompson cried. Thursday night, last practice with Elijah. Marcus played the entire Sinfonia in B minor. When the last note died, Elijah had tears in his eyes. You still have it, Marcus. It's different. There's pain, but there's soul. And soul is what matters. What if I freeze out there? What if the pain is too much? Then you stop, you breathe, and you keep going. But you don't run away. Not anymore. Marcus picked up the violin case. Professor Morrison, thank you for believing in the ghost of who I was. I don't believe in the ghost, Elijah said softly. I believe in the man who survived. The man who worked 2 jobs to give his son what the world took from him. The man who, when cornered, chose to fight instead of beg. That man is stronger than the 17-year-old boy, and tomorrow, everyone is going to see it. Friday, 6:48 p.m. Marcus was in the staff locker room, wearing a black suit borrowed from Elijah. His hands were trembling as he adjusted his tie. Jerry walked in. The auditorium is packed, man. People are standing. The director invited half of New York for this. He hesitated. Are you sure? Marcus looked at his hands. Hands calloused from decades of work. Hands that held a mop and a rag. Hands that had once been a promise of greatness and were now just survivors. No, Marcus said honestly. But I'm going anyway. As he entered the backstage area of the auditorium, he could hear the crowd's murmur. Laughter, comments, anticipation for the show, and then he saw Helen Pritchard, dressed in an evening gown, smiling that shark smile. She saw him, came over to him. Mr. Thompson, what a surprise you actually showed up. I thought you might run away. I don't run, Marcus said. Ah, but you did run. 34 years ago, when your little hands broke and you hid in cleaning uniforms for the rest of your life. She came closer, venom in her voice. I know everything about you, Marcus. The fraud you are, the has-been who never was, and in 10 minutes 300 people will know too. They'll see you fail. They'll see you prove you were always exactly what you look like, a janitor. Nothing more. That's when Marcus saw, through the glass of the backstage door, David enter the auditorium. His son, who sat down in the back row, arms crossed, waiting, judging, needing an answer. Then I guess I better not disappoint, Marcus said, and took the violin from the case. Helen gave that laugh. This is going to be a slaughter. She stepped onto the stage, her heel echoing. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our mid-semester recital. But before our talented students, we have a special event. A member of our support staff has alleged musical abilities, so, in the spirit of equal opportunities, she paused for effect, and Marcus heard the laughter beginning. We are going to give him the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus Thompson, our janitor. The applause was sarcastic. Marcus heard mocking whistles, ill-concealed laughter. When he stepped onto the stage, the noise intensified. There he was, a 52-year-old black man, his janitor's uniform replaced by a borrowed suit, holding a violin as if it were his last hope. In the front row, Helen Pritchard already had her phone ready to record. In the back rows, he saw professors shaking their heads, students laughing, and then he saw David, his son, with tears already forming in his eyes. Not from pride, from the anticipation of shame. Marcus positioned the violin, felt the familiar pain in his hands, closed his eyes, and thought of one thing Elijah had said. Don't play to prove anything to them. Play to remind yourself who you always were. At this moment, before I tell you if Marcus succeeded or if the weight of 34 years and broken hands won, I have to ask, have you ever had to prove something everyone doubted? Have you ever had to stand up when the world expected you to fall? Comment below where you're watching from and tell me, do you believe talent conquers trauma? Because what happens in the next 3 minutes will answer that question in a way no one in that auditorium expected. And if your heart is racing like Marcus's right now, if you need to know if he makes it, hit the subscribe button below because the conclusion of this story will leave you in tears. Of sadness or joy, you'll have to find out. The first note that came from Marcus's violin cut through the auditorium air like a scream. It wasn't beautiful. It was raw, desperate, real, and absolutely unexpected. The laughter died. Not gradually, all at once. As if someone had cut the sound, Marcus kept his eyes closed and continued. Vivaldi's Sinfonia in B minor wasn't about technical perfection. It was about pain transformed into beauty, and Marcus had 34 years of stored pain. Every note carried weight. The weight of buried dreams, of broken hands, of decades cleaning the same hallways where he once might have taught. At 20 seconds, the first person in the audience understood. It was an elderly woman in the 5th row, a professor emerita of music history. She leaned forward, her mouth slightly open. She recognized it. Not just the music, but the soul behind it. At 40 seconds, the murmur of surprise began. This wasn't a janitor messing around with an instrument. This was someone who knew, someone who had studied, lived, bled for it. Helen Pritchard in the front row felt the smile die on her face. Something was wrong. No, not wrong. Something was right. Terribly right. Midway through the second minute, Marcus reached the part Elijah had said was impossible with his hands. The fast passage where fingers needed to dance across the strings like water. His hands screamed in pain. His fingers didn't move as fast as they needed to. He started to lag, to stutter the notes. In the audience, some frowned. See? Someone whispered. He can't do it. But then Marcus did something no one expected. He changed. Right there in the middle of the performance, he improvised. He transformed the fast passage into something slower, more melancholic. He made the limitations of his hands tell a different story. The story of someone who could no longer fly, but learned a different way to sing. And suddenly it wasn't about the notes he couldn't play. It was about the notes only he could play. The notes loaded with decades of forced silence. Professor Elijah Morrison, who had discreetly entered and was standing in the back, had tears streaming freely down his face. He had taught hundreds of students over 5 decades. He had seen prodigies, geniuses, masters, but he had never seen anyone play with such pure honesty. At 2 minutes and 40 seconds, Marcus opened his eyes for the first time and looked directly at David. His son was standing now, not even realizing it, tears running down his face. Not of shame, of something much deeper, of understanding, of grief for the father he never knew, of pride for the father who survived. The last note sustained in the air for 4 full seconds. When it died, the silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. No one breathed. Then the professor emerita in the 5th row stood up and began to applaud. Slowly, deliberately. A second person stood up, then an entire row. Within 15 seconds, the entire auditorium was on its feet. Everyone. Students, professors, donors. The applause was deafening. But Marcus only saw David. His son, pushing people aside to get to the front, running down the side aisle, stepping onto the stage. And then David's arms were around him, and Marcus realized he was sobbing. "I'm so sorry," David cried. "I'm sorry I said that. You were never a coward. You never were." "I needed you to say it," Marcus whispered back. "Because you were right. I had stopped fighting." That's when Helen Pritchard got onto the stage. Her face was white. She looked at the still applauding crowd, then at Marcus. "That was Unexpected, she said, her voice sounding strange even on the microphone. Mr. Thompson, it seems you have some level of ability. Some level? The voice came from the back of the auditorium. Professor Morrison was walking down the aisle, old but firm. Helen, what we just witnessed was the work of someone who was accepted into Juilliard at 17. Someone the critics called the most promising voice of his generation. Until 3 men decided a young black man's hands were worth more as scrap metal. The auditorium fell silent again. Morrison stepped onto the stage. Marcus Thompson doesn't work here because he lacks talent. He works here because no one gives second chances to broken dreams. No one asked the janitor if he was ever something else, we just assume. Helen was visibly trembling now. I didn't know. You knew, Marcus said calmly. You read my file. You chose the most difficult piece specifically to see me fail. She didn't deny it. She couldn't. The whole audience had seen her cruelty. The calculated trap. We had an agreement, Morrison said. If Marcus played acceptably, he would be hired as an assistant professor. That was a joke. It was a promise, with witnesses. And I strongly suggest you honor it unless you'd prefer the university board to hear about how you staged a public humiliation of an employee based on, he paused significantly, certain discriminations. Helen looked around, saw the faces of the audience, saw the phones recording, saw her reputation hanging by a thread. Of course, she said, her voice tight. Mr. Thompson, Monday you start as an assistant professor of music, with full salary and benefits. She quickly stepped down from the stage, her heels echoing like gunshots. But Marcus barely registered it. Because there, pushing her way through the crowd that now surrounded the stage, was a woman in her mid-40s with a press badge. Mr. Thompson? Sarah Chen, New York Times. Can I have 5 minutes? And so it began. The story spread like wildfire. Janitor reveals past as musical prodigy in emotional performance. By the following Wednesday, the video had 3 million views. By Friday, Marcus had received offers from 5 different orchestras for guest performances. Juilliard, the same Juilliard that had disappeared after the accident 34 years ago, sent a letter, an apology letter, and an invitation to give a masterclass lecture. But the moment Marcus would cherish forever happened the following Sunday. He was in the small kitchen in Queens making coffee when David appeared holding a violin case. I bought it, David said sheepishly. I thought maybe you could teach me. I mean, I know I'm old to start 19, but you are never too old, Marcus said, his voice choked with emotion. And I would love to. As he showed David how to hold the bow, how to position his fingers, Marcus thought of something. Helen Pritchard had tried to use his past as a weapon. She had dug up his wounds, his failures, his broken dreams, and turned everything into ammunition to destroy him. But what she didn't understand, what no one in that auditorium understood until they saw it, was that the wounds are part of the music. That broken and mended hands play with a depth that perfect hands will never have. That 34 years of silence create a hunger that cannot be satisfied, only expressed. 3 months later, Marcus taught his first official class as Assistant Professor Thompson. 20 students, half of them working-class students on scholarships. He began the class the same way every week. Music isn't about having perfect hands or a perfect life. It's about taking what life gave you, even if it's broken, twisted, painful, and making something beautiful anyway. You're not here to be perfect. You're here to be real. And when his students played, he heard not just the notes. He heard the stories, the struggles, the dreams that had been postponed but not destroyed. A year later, Helen Pritchard quietly resigned. No one mourned. Professor Morrison retired, but not before seeing Marcus receive tenure. And on a night in May, 2 years after that fateful Friday, Marcus Thompson stepped onto the Carnegie Hall stage for a benefit performance. David was in the audience, front row, now playing the violin too, not professionally but for love. And when Marcus played, hands still aching, fingers still limited, but his soul completely free. He didn't play Vivaldi. He played a composition of his own. He called it second movement. Because sometimes life doesn't give you a restart. It gives you a second movement, different from the first. Slower, maybe, with more pauses, but no less beautiful. Just different. And when the last note died and the applause erupted, Marcus looked at his hands. Hands that had scrubbed floors, that had bled, that had been broken and declared dead, but which now, finally, were alive. "Thank you," he whispered to them, "for waiting." This story of Marcus Thompson reminds us of something crucial. How many Marcuses are there in the world right now? How many talents are hidden behind work uniforms, behind prejudice, behind accidents that defined entire lives? How many times have you passed someone and assumed you knew their whole story just by the clothes they wore? If this story touched you, if it made you think differently about the people around you, I invite you to be part of this community. Subscribe to the channel not just for the content, but because here we believe everyone has a second chance waiting. Everyone has a second movement. Tell us in the comments, what is your hidden talent? What did you stop doing that still burns inside you? Let's create a space where these stories can be told without judgment. Because in the end, we are all Marcus. We all have something broken that could, with courage and time, make music again. See you in the next story. And remember, it's never too late for the second movement to begin.